So, in terms of, no, never mind. It's not about terms, but no, I just watched um this little movie here. It's very short. I well, might as well be, I guess. It doesn't say much and so repetitive. It's supposed to be a legend like the Kuchisaka Onna, except it's kind of miniaturized version, I guess. I mean, I don't know. The Kuchisaka was more had more of a personality. I mean, even the first movie, we at least see more of her and what she was like before she became zombie figure. Whereas with this, I'm talking about the so-called Teke monster. You know, well, there is very little time dedicated to her backstory. I mean, practically, I don't think it was even 5 minutes. And otherwise, it's all that she ever does. Just goes around and kills people in the most gruesome way. And somehow she's supposed to be a bull, apparently, because of her fear of the color red. And I don't know, like even the first movie for the Kuchisaka Onna wasn't very complex, but it was more complex than this. Of course, the second movie provided even more of a background for that, which was different. Now, this is a second movie as well, apparently. I'm not expecting much better though. Who knows? Maybe it does something similar to the Kuchisaka legend. This was so very much the bare minimum that they could do, really. I mean, it's barely an hour here, and the only thing of note that I could notice were colors. So there were some subdued colors for autumn and the forest, but obviously they're kind of ruined with this thing pursuing them. I don't know, yeah, and it just seemed very hopeless, and um, I mean, it had minor vibes from The Ring, but it didn't really, not at all like it. I mean, The Ring is much more layered. In terms of the urgency they had at one point, from what I remember, it was in The Ring as well. They needed to resolve something before time is up, whichever. But The Ring though is more subtle, I guess. In a way, it's sort of similar because this this girl, or not half a girl, but this girl comes at you from a TV. So that's adds an extra layer of creepy. But I don't know what's creepy is. Is it something that comes at you really fast, or something kind of really slow? That in The Ring. Obviously, when it comes to backstory, though, nothing beats The Ring. It has the most tragic backstory, and I mean, this I suppose you could say was um, a sad backstory, but it was so quick, just done so quickly. And then there was someone else who said that she shouldn't be believed as well. So this not only did it go by quickly, the guy said that it wasn't even true, and then we find out that it sort of is. But I don't know, just it's a weird sort of thing, everything based on legends. I mean, recently I watched movies based on the legend of Mainak from Thailand, and in comparison, I mean, that is much more subtle. I mean, both movies I watched were more subtle. This, on the other hand, is just, I mean, this is pretty much half a zombie who happens to go by fast. And yeah, generally, I don't really like zombie movies, so maybe that's why I didn't really. Just, but really, the fact that it's not much of a story, and what it does have is centered around dating and shallow talk. Other than that, there's just a depressive mood that characters have. I mean, even in comparison to, um, this movie I watched, The Wig. The Wig was ridiculous, but even that had more of a somber storyline. This, on the other hand, uh, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't expect too much of these sort of legend adaptations, and perhaps also I'm watching too much of them, so then they just lose their, if there is any sort of effect that one can. I mean, if this was the first horror movie I watched, maybe I'd be scared, but it's not even just that, is it? I mean, ideally, they should have some sort of, storyline, because, even the scare factor depends on the layers that the storyline can build. If there's no storyline, then there's just special effects, and uh, I mean, I'm 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 not normally impressed just because I'm seeing some sort of scaly arms walking by themselves really fast. I mean, yeah, I just I guess there's many of these sort of copies of legends that, and they just, yeah, I don't know, it's just one of those things, I guess, that isn't very impressive. Or maybe it's because I've watched it, uh, so, you know, after watching a lot of better movies, I suppose one could say. Possibly. I don't know. I suppose I'll watch the sequel. I usually do, but not very very soon. Took me about a week to catch the second, but I doubt, maybe just, so yeah, whenever I feel like it doesn't really matter. At least I was able to find it in HD on K.AI, because otherwise, I mean, what's the point of watching a horror movie that isn't even really the greatest thing ever in SD as well? SD makes it just look worse, doesn't it? At least I could see the forest and such as best as possible. That's just a technical sort of complaint, I suppose, that I usually have. Yeah, so. Hmm.
Alright, so I watched the sequel to so-called Teketeke, which apparently is, the only good thing about it, pretty much, is the onomatopoeia. That's pretty much it. Yeah, I mean, I give them that they try to play with words. Not many horror films do that, but they try. But beyond that, yeah, beyond that, there's not much really. It's brutal as I guess many the average horror film can be. I don't personally like them to be like that at all. I don't personally find them to be the most sort of horrifying. Then as I mentioned in the past, you get like Jacob's letter, which aren't brutal, and yet they're still horrifying. So you could entirely do that without being brutal and horrifying. In this one, we learned what that they target people based on their names. That's pretty much it. So the first one we learned that they go after the color of red, and this one they target people based on their names. Um, yeah. Uh, I don't know. Beyond that, that's the peak of interest, I think. Honestly, the only scene I enjoyed pretty much was the scene with that old guy in the house. It's peaceful, such. He was just reading and playing some game by himself at one point, and just the scene where they're in the classroom and their windows are shuttered and it's all golden, presumably dusk. It's sort of reprieve, an otherwise brutal movie, but obviously a couple of things, a couple of moments do not save a movie, to say the least. Other than that, well, what I can do is compare it with the other ones that the same director directed apparently. So that's Koji Shiraishi. He did do Carved, right? Kuchisaka Onna. Um, not sure he did the second, but I don't think he did the second. He also recently did Hellgirl. Also, I haven't seen the anime yet, so I haven't. Yeah. Other than that, yeah, he actually did Jure as well. I'm not sure if I watched it. I don't think I did. So that's pretty much it. I don't know what I think of this guy then, what he does. Um, Kuchisaka Onna was better in the sense that it did scare me, It was still brutal, but it scared me, and it had more of a backstory. And the characters had backstory as well, besides, like a localized conflict. This this is the problem with many of these movies. They create conflicts, but they do them with characters that do not have any backgrounds. They're just cardboard cutouts, pretty much. Like the one who just has a lollipop all the time, and she just likes bringing up trouble, and the other one who just wants revenge and just so happens to have the same name, Reiko, as the one who presumably is the Teketeke. But honestly, besides that, in terms of the Kuchi Sakon, I don't know, I like it better. I like the supernatural aspect better. I mean, this didn't have much. You see, for example, this didn't really comment at all on how Teketeke becomes one. I mean, we see another one become, in the second one, but that's pretty much it. There weren't any other instances, and there's no indication of how and why they do. Whereas the Kuchiseko, nah, it happens, and it happens in a sort of interesting way, isn't it? It's more interesting than funny. I suppose one could say with sneezing and such, sort of funny anyway. Uh, but with this, it's not really much, and I'm not even sure why that one does become one, because no one else does. So why did she become one? It's not entirely clear why. A few seconds prior, her so-called friend cried over. I mean, I assume because she was just a friend, but I don't see. Anyway, it's just I don't know. It wasn't. I mean, didn't seem to be as interesting as Kuchisako. I mean, it's not like I'm not saying Kuchisake is on the level as Jacob's Leather or Altered States. Even I mean, those are such better horror, But Kuchisake did what it's supposed to, what the genre is supposed to do. Terrifying. The first one did at least. The second one was much more in depth. It as a horror movie, it went much more in depth, much more. I mean, admittedly, that made the first hour or so not really seem like a horror movie at all. But it gave it a backbone, so I liked it better. So in a way, I'm not sure if maybe it's because he didn't direct the second one, right? I think he didn't direct it. I don't know whether that's why. As I said, even the first one achieved something, so it was sort of better, At least I felt something, M- you know. Most of what I felt with these couple of Teketeke thingies is just a slight bit of disgust. It's not something I want to feel, of course. Disgust. I don't go to horror movies to feel disgust. But that's pretty much it. I don't know what else they were trying to do, really. I mean, obviously there are many other movies that have even more disgust as an element. But no, horror movies should really be there just for horror, as the name implies. Um, I mean, this is supposed to be a so-called slasher, which technically even Psycho is. But Psycho is very much different, isn't it? I mean, I prefer Psycho. Really? What's the point of this? I don't get it. Um, Psycho is a big story. Psycho is a whole story, one can say. Ultimately, admittedly, it didn't terrify me as much. I don't know what does really, but um, I guess even slashers are made differently, shall we say? Um, yeah, and this Teketeke thing didn't really do much for me. I mean, I've seen better, and even in terms of yokai or Mononoke in general, since this is supposed to be one as a legend. I've seen much better. I mean, sure, usually it's in animated form. The animated form is so much better usually, no matter what, just because it's animated, it just has the potential to be better. But even that, I mean, they could still have a story. They could still have, some horror movies seem to be made just to really just dish them out, just like one after another. There's not much to it. They seem to just like I notice, right, that these two Takataka movies were made in the same year. That can only mean that they made them together, presumably, unless they just happened to release them in the same year, despite not being made in the same year. Um, but it can only really mean that they didn't really concentrate on any one of them, and they just made them and as fast as possible and released them in the same year. You know, so it sort of shows in the plot, and the even the CG. Apparently some CGI was used. I'm assuming in the monsters construction in itself, but it's not very impressive anyway. Just has some shiny thing in its eye, and that's it. And fins or whatever they are. Uh, it would have been better if they just concentrated on the story more, though. If instead of, I don't know, maybe maybe they shouldn't have made the monster to be pretty much invulnerable, because Kuchisakonna wasn't impossible to beat. I mean, some people beat her sometimes, so that makes it sort of interesting. Whereas this thing, yeah, just seems so impossible, right? And somehow Just seems like it might disappear sometimes if you happen to do something, whether it's from the first one, just moving some stone, or the second one you supposedly chanting the word, but then or some other explanation did somehow. It seems very random and arbitrary, and it just doesn't feel real or substantial. Yeah.